This video is on What If Naruto Was the Eternal Sage Part 2. The like goal for this video is 30 likes. Sooner the like goal is met sooner I will upload the next part for this what if. If you enjoy this what if, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to the channel. Disclaimer, I don't own Naruto nor this fanfic. From his perch in the darkness, 12-year-old Naruto could easily make out the 73 bandits that made up the camp, which was his target. His superior hearing picked up the whimpers and subdued crying coming from the tent pitched in the center of the clearing, where he knew the kidnapped women and girls they were being held captive. He had been going on such bandit clearing missions for months now, knowing that the smaller villages in Fire Country often lacked military protection and were thus susceptible to bandit raids. So, he would sneak out of Konoha and go to those villages, offering his services for free. Of course, he sometimes had to explain to the people that he was more than capable of carrying out the mission, though he had found that simply fixing them with a look got things moving pretty quickly. Ever the meticulous one, Naruto performed last-minute checks before beginning what he had mentally termed Operation Wipeout. His self-made high-quality kunai and shuriken were all accounted for and easily accessible. His all-black fitted outfit was ready as well, and no loose material to flap and give him away or hinder his movements. Finally, he used his chakra to probe the complex sealing array on the back of his hand, which was hidden by the black fingerless gloves he wore. The seal, a customized limiter seal, was something he discovered he needed during the first of such secret outings to wipe out bandit camps. On that first pro bono mission, he had snuck into a bandit camp, navigating to the tent holding the captives without being detected by any of the bandits. His intention was to get the captives free, via use of his clones, and well on their way back to their little village and their loved ones before he commenced with taking down the bandits. The bounty placed on them had requested that the women captured be returned unharmed and the bandits taken in dead or alive, and knowing that it was actually more difficult capturing enemies alive than dead, he had chosen to keep them alive. Well, that was his intention before he had slipped into the tent to find that the captives had all been brutally raped and murdered and the oldest had been only 14. Silence spread unnaturally fast through the clearing as all the normal sounds of the nighttime forest stilled. The bandits, quickly sensing the tense atmosphere, began to reach for their weapons. As the first man's fingers brushed the hilt of his sword, the very air in the clearing detonated with the force of a dying sun, instantly killing every single living human present. Not a single drop of blood was spilt, not a single sound was made, no flames, no lightning, no jutsu whatsoever was cast. 60 lives were extinguished by raw, ferocious and quite frankly, godly, killing intent. After Naruto had turned the bandits' bodies to ash and returned the murdered victims to their loved ones, he reflected on the mission, if it could be called that. Realizing that the level he was at could turn a simple face slap delivered in anger into a beheading strike, he set out to rectify the situation. Years ago, when he had lived the life of an Uzumaki clansman, he had heard of theoretical limiter seals intended to drag beings on par with the Baijiu down to the level of common ninja. These seals would be heads above the generic limiter seals, which merely limited chakra or provided resistance to physical exertion. No, these theoretical seals would have the power to infiltrate not just the chakra system of the target, but also the neural system as well. Their activation would lock away a stipulated portion of the target's chakra capacity, thereby both limiting the amount of chakra they have as well as their rate of chakra regeneration. They would also limit the rate of transfer of neurons along their neural network, resulting in slowed down reflexes, loss of strength and a general diminishing of the target's capabilities and attributes. Under the effects of the seal, gods would be as men. It took 4 months of constant work using a veritable horde of shadow clones, but Naruto did it. He implemented 7 levels, level 1, being the inactive state of the seal, to level 7 placing him on par with the better jounins of Konoha. He also designed the seal with a quick release mechanism allowing him to jump in levels with but a thought. Silent as the shadows he hid in, he made his way towards the improvised prison. Slipping inside, his nose, covered by a black face mask reminiscent of the one worn by Kakashi, picked up the scent of blood, sex and tears to his right, praying, and yet already knowing that it was futile. He turned to find a girl child of about 9 years old spread-eagled on the bed and staring blankly at nothing. The movement of her chest and the sound of her heart beating assured him she was still alive. The blankness of her gaze and the fluids flowing down her thighs, which his nose informed him were from 3 different men, told him that she was dead in other ways. The sight and smell before him caused his body to still and his eyes to turn flat and frigid. Peripherally he was aware that the captives he had come to rescue had drawn back from him in terror, but he could not bring himself to care about that at the moment. Turning back to the entrance to the tent, he spoke in a voice that impossibly managed to come out soft and soothing. "Elder Kaaba sent me for you. Please, stay here while I take care of the filth outside." Before any of the people inside the tent could utter a word, a clone had materialized beside Naruto with no prior warning, and Naruto stepped outside. Naruto touched his hand to the tent flap and a shimmering blue wave passed over the tent, signifying that a combination sound and physical barriers had gone up. Inside the tent, the clone set about soothing and calming the captives as well as healing those who needed it using medical chakra. Naruto forewent using any method to disguise himself as he calmly and nonchalantly walked towards the main campfire. Some of the men in the camp had obviously noticed him, judging by the sound of swords leaving their sheaths as well as the malicious chuckles emanating from some of them. A huge bear of a man, obviously the bandit in charge, stepped forward and in a voice that indicated he was simply going through the motions addressed Naruto. "Hey Gaki, you lost? We could help you find your way back a broken bar, but then again, you could just as well stay with us and entertain Rick." Naruto flicked his ninjato to dislodge the blood clinging to it and watched dispassionately as the lead bandit bled out from the second mouth on his neck. The other bandits glanced fearfully at the place Naruto was standing at the start of the leader's speech, and only the quickest of them caught a glimpse of the fading afterimage left behind when Naruto moved at blurring speeds. Finally realizing that they were way outmatched, one of the smarter bandits turned to flee and collapsed, only for his head to roll away from his body. The rest of the bandits had finally caught on to the situation they were in, and the camp erupted in chaos as most chose to run for their lives. 15 minutes later it had all ended in a blur of black, gold and silver. Naruto had blazed through the throng, slicing through bodies, armor and swords as though he were performing katas in open air. His cuts were quick, clean and efficient, granting instant death to all he struck at. Even though the men were little more than despicable beasts, he would not reduce himself to making them needlessly suffer. Casting his senses around the encampment, he confirmed that all 72 bodies were accounted for. He gave an unnoticeable smirk as he turned to return to the captive's tent. His eyes widened as a blade erupted from his chest. He gurgled as the attacker ripped the blade free with a malicious smile on his unseen face. The smile was abruptly replaced with a grimace of pain as the body he still had a hold on dispersed with a surge of lightning. After his muscles had stopped twitching and he had regained mobility again, he spun in a circle, searching for his elusive prey. Naruto's calm and vaguely amused tone floated through the clearing. "I wondered when you would show yourself. It figures that trash like you would wait till the last moment to attack from behind." The mysterious assailant, a ninja no doubt, gave off a vicious snarl at Naruto's statement. In a tone filled with hatred attempting to mask the fear underneath, he said, "Why don't you show yourself if you think you're not trash, huh?" He immediately paled as he heard a chuckle from about a foot behind him. He spun, swinging his sword at chest-height neck height for Naruto, intending to end this fight quickly, only to find that his opponent at the trial day was actually much farther away. He quickly assessed the figure in front of him and was taken aback at the fact that the other was completely at ease. The first emotion he felt was fear that the person was so skilled that he didn't need to pay attention to him. However, fear quickly gave way to anger, as the situation reminded him of the way people in his home village of Kumo had dismissed him as someone who would never amount to anything, a broken bar, and now, "I'm the leader of the biggest and most infamous bandit group in Fire Country, a broken bar." Well, I was at any rate, seeing as he never ascended past the rank of Chunin, he had been unable to follow Naruto as he cut a swath of destruction through the bandit camp. His realization did not translate into caution, however, and he switched to an offensive stance and with no more discussion, sprang at Naruto. Naruto had been observing the ninja before him since the beginning and thus easily sidestepped his initial lunge. He made no motion to unsheath his ninjato from where it hung on his back, held in place by a subconscious application of chakra. He kept on dodging the swings of the enemy Chunin, moving only as much as necessary to have the attacking blade pass him harmlessly by. As time went on, the ninja's attacks got sloppier as frustration and fear emerged to slowly overcome the rage that had initially driven his swings. All through this, Naruto kept on dodging with the same calm and amused smile on his face. Moments later, he got a notification from his clone, informing him that all the captives had been successfully returned to their home village. Finally, now I can finish up here and get back home. For the first time during the entire confrontation, Naruto reacted to the ninja attacking him. On his next swing, the enemy ninja found an obstacle in his path in the form of Naruto's silver-bladed ninjato. He only had time for his eyes to widen before Naruto sent a surge of lightning chakra down his blade, into the enemy's sword and then ground it via his body. The ninja's muscles spasmed and he let loose a pain-filled scream. Naruto cut off the flow of chakra to the weapon and watched the ninja fall to his knees. He locked gazes with his opponent and in one smooth and graceful motion, removed his head. After burning the ninja's body, he sealed his head in a storage scroll. He had memorized the bingo book and recalled a bounty on the Kumo Chunin's head. He searched the bandit camp for any loot and stored those in scrolls as well, intending to return most of it to the village the bandits had pillaged. He walked to the edge of the clearing and turned back to face the camp. Then he molded his chakra, stamped his foot and intoned Earth Release, Earthland Flip, and watched as a square section of the ground roughly the size of the camp flipped over, leaving a bare and unblemished clearing where before stood the equivalent of a mass burial site. His work done with, Naruto vanished from the clearing with a flash of lightning and a rumble of thunder. Sneaking back into the village was as easy as ever. Naruto stealthily made his way back to his apartment door. He simply placed his hand on the door and pushed it open, having replaced all the locks with a complex, and sometimes lethal, sealing array. He took off his stealth clothes, pleased to note that there was not a single drop of blood on them. After cleaning up his equipment and himself, he got ready for bed. Tomorrow was the academy graduation exams and he had big plans. Ever since he returned to the academy after his reawakening, he had established a pattern of always missing written tests, ninjutsu practices, taijutsu tournaments, spars, as well as weapons accuracy tests. Having perused the syllabus of the academy as well as snuck into view some of the files in the principal's office, he was well aware that it was possible for him to graduate the academy without having ever attended any of the above activities, and he was very much enamored with the idea of shocking everyone with his never before seen skills. Of course, Ruka had tried talking to him to get him to stop skipping school on those days, even going so far as to involve the Sandaime Hokage. Between the two of them, it should have been a trivial matter to change Naruto's mind. The two found out, however, that no one could out stubborn Naruto. After he pointed out that there were absolutely no consequences of missing those class periods, Ruka tried to mention that the skills developed during those classes were essential to graduation. Naruto merely gave the two an enigmatic smile and said, "Ruka-sensei, I will achieve the highest ever recorded score on the final graduation exam." Naruto had delivered that statement in such a straightforward and serious tone, his blue gaze solemn, focused and piercing, that the Hokage and Ruka had been struck speechless. After the silence brought on by Naruto's declaration, Sarutobi sat back in his seat and gazed thoughtfully at the young man in front of him. "Very well, Naruto." Silencing Ruka's protests before they could occur, he continued with a kind and proud look in his eye, "I believe in you." Picking up on the odd phrasing of that last statement, Ruka could say nothing else to that. Whatever it was the Hokage had seen as he gazed at Naruto must have been something, and indeed it was. For when Sarutobi had looked at Naruto, he was reminded of another blonde-haired man standing in his office, almost 2 decades ago, with the same determined and piercing blue eyes, declaring in the same solemn and confident tone. Sarutobi-sama, send me. I will end this war. Some of the students already seated in the classroom turned at the sound of the door opening to find their most truant classmate walking in. As had been the case for the past 2 years, Naruto was dressed in his dark red muscle shirt, partial covered by an open black sleeveless jacket. He also wore black shorts, black steel-toed combat boots and a dark red face mask that covered everything below his nose. The first time Naruto had entered the classroom dressed like that day after awakening from his coma. Not that any of the students knew that a silence had quickly descended upon the children gathered in the room. True to form, Inuzuka Kiba had taken the chance to rib Naruto. Hey dead last, nice threads, your injury must have fixed your fashion sense, but I'm not sure it did anything for your lack of ninja skills. Even though there was nothing particularly witty about that statement, most of the other students still laughed because this was Naruto and that was what they did. Normally, the laughter would have been interrupted by an obnoxiously loud declaration from Naruto, protesting what Kiba had said and declaring that he would show them the greatness of the future Hokage. A broken bar, but it never came. At this deviation from the norm, people quickly focused on Naruto only to realize that he hadn't even paid attention to Kiba or the rest of the class. In fact, Naruto had never stopped walking and was already seated in the back of the room. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, Kiba threw out another taunt, intending to get a reaction from Naruto. A broken bar, nothing. By this point, some of the other students had become uncomfortable and were shifting in their seats. Taunt after mocking taunt, and all Naruto did was sit there, calmly staring out of the window by his seat. Finally getting desperate, Kiba began, "And what's with that face mask? Finally realized that it must have been your ugly mug that caused your par," and he stopped. Wondering at what had interrupted Kiba, the students turned to look at him and found him pale and shaking, and even picked up faint whimpers emanating from his jacket where Akamaru was hidden. Quickly their gazes cut back to Naruto and most of them shivered in fear. Naruto's eyes, that had once been calm and disinterested, were now frigid, deadly and unwaveringly trained on Kiba. After a few more seconds during which everyone held their breath, Naruto finally turned his gaze back to the window. It took a few minutes before people felt comfortable enough to resume their original discussions, and even then, there was still an undercurrent of unease running through the room. At the start of the one-sided confrontation, Uchiha Sasuke looked up in well-hidden interest. He had gotten bored when Naruto didn't react and returned to brooding, as he was often wont to do. When slightly frightened silence had descended, however, he quickly played back what Kiba had just said, and realizing that Kiba had been about to cross a line by mentioning Naruto's no doubt dead parents, he turned an angry gaze on him. A gaze that quickly turned surprised as he found Kiba looking like he had just seen a ghost. When he glanced at Naruto and noticed his glacial eyes, he had a brief flashback to the night his family was murdered, and a slight shiver of fear traveled down his spine. He silently berated himself for his reaction and made a mental note to pay more attention to the obviously much changed Naruto. A few minutes after the students had resumed talking amongst themselves, Ruka walked in and began the lesson of the day. Months after the start of the academy term and Naruto's memorable reintroduction to his classmates, the students of Ruka's class began to notice that Naruto never attended classes where they had ninja-based evaluations such as weapons accuracy tests, taijutsu spars and so on. Grasping at something familiar and safe, they immediately began to speculate that Naruto, no matter the change in attitude and clothing, was still the same unskilled idiot, but only much quieter. You see, they chose to interpret his absences as him trying to avoid getting embarrassed by having his mediocre skills and inadequacies aired for all to see. So, now, not only were they convinced that he was a dead-last loser, but also a cowardly one too. Sasuke had obviously heard such rumors, and with no evidence to say otherwise, having already forgotten Naruto's interaction with Kiba, Sasuke too was convinced that Naruto was nothing interesting and promptly went back to ignoring him. Naruto, who was aware of what was being said, simply ignored the squabbling children playing at being ninjas and continued to train and just generally do his own thing. Ruka finally arrived and the students quieted down in nervous anticipation. Quick on his heels was the assistant instructor, Mizuki, carrying in his arms the written portion of the academy exams. Ruka promptly began, "Well then, I see you're all quiet and eager for your exams, so we'll start right away. The exams will have 5 parts of 10 points each, a written exam, a weapons accuracy test, a stealth test, a taijutsu spar and finally a ninjutsu evaluation. Now, as has always been the case, all portions of the exams save the written portion will have allowances for students to gain extra credit if they wish. As each portion comes up, I will let you know how the extra credit part works. Now, for these written exams, you have 15 minutes to answer all 100 questions correctly. Now, don't feel too bad when you can't answer everything in the time given. The exams are made to be unbeatable and the record for this part of the exam has been held for over 5 decades by our very own Sandaime Hokage. Many students broke out in hushed murmuring at that little tidbit. Smirking to himself, Ruka signaled Mizuki to hand out the exams and when he finished, he gave the students the go-ahead to begin. Naruto glanced once through the exam and began filling in the correct answers without hesitation, having lived for as long as he had and memorized the academy books on top of that. It was a trivial issue for him to know the answers. Coupled with his body's impressive speed and hand-eye coordination, he easily blazed through the written exams and finished a few minutes before the time was up. Ruka, noticing that Naruto was done, as did Mizuki, frowned in confusion. He knew how difficult the exams were and though they were multiple choice questions, they still took time to finish. Just what is the demon brat up to? Mizuki thought to himself. His plans were dependent on Naruto living up to his dead-last reputation and bombing the exams. He quickly calmed himself by thinking that Naruto must have either filled in absolute rubbish or just skipped a whole lot of questions as the plan was still on and soon, or Orochimaru-sama would bestow on him unimaginable power. At the 15-minute mark, the timer went off and Mizuki collected the papers for Ruka to start grading. A lot of the students grumbled about how they couldn't finish the exam and how most of them never got beyond the 70th question. Haruno Sakura, lauded as the smartest student in her year, turned to Ruka and asked, "Anno, Ruka-sensei, you said that the Sandaime had the record for highest score in this portion of the exam, but you never told us what he scored." Ruka smiled at her and replied, "I had wondered when one of you would ask. I told you not to expect too much on the exam because the highest recorded score is an 89. Most of the students were visibly startled at that. Then Ruka continued, "Now, the next portion is the weapons accuracy test. I want you all to follow Mizuki, who will oversee the test while I get to grading your exams. I'm sure it won't take me long." Mizuki led the students outside to the weapons range. The range had 2 lines at a measured distance from the targets. The closest line was at 100 yards while the second was behind it, at 150 yards. The 10 targets were man-shaped cardboard cutouts with special red kill spots marked on them. Turning to the students, Mizuki began instructing them on the next portion of their exam. For the weapons and accuracy test, I will call your name and you will step up and receive 5 kunais and 5 shurikens from me. You will stand at the 100-yard line and throw at the targets down the range. Your goal is to hit as many red-marked fatal points as possible. For each kill point you hit, you get 1 point. As Ruka mentioned, there is an opportunity for extra credit here. If you want to try for extra credit, you must step up to the 150-yard line and try to hit 10 of the kill spots with only the use of shuriken. Each point you hit properly grants you 2 points, but each one you miss costs you 1. So, if you try for extra credit and hit only 6 points, you get 8 points in total. Oh, and before I forget, the targets will be in motion for the extra credit part. Now, let's begin. Abraham Shino. Shino stepped up to the 100-yard line and, receiving the weapons from Mizuki, began to throw them one by one at the targets. He got 4 out of 5 of his targets using kunai and 3 out of 5 with shuriken. Mizuki noted his score down and called the next person up. This continued for a while, with all the students so far opting to forego the attempt at extra credit. Next, Mizuki called forward Kiba, who decided to try for extra credit. Strutting forward to the taunting calls of his classmate, Kiba accepted the weapons from Mizuki and stood at the 150-yard line. At this point, most of the class was quiet and focused on Kiba. Mizuki activated the mechanism that set the targets in motion and Kiba began. He threw the first 5 shuriken in quick succession and got 4 kill spots. The students watching cheered him on, and bolstered by his success, he got too cocky and launched the last 5 weapons faster than before and only scored 3 out of 5. Still, with a total score of 11 points, he was the current highest scorer. He threw a smug smirk at Sasuke and swaggered back to his place in line. The other students after him were encouraged by his success and started trying from the extra credit line. None, however, were able to do as well as Kiba, until it was Sasuke's turn. The students immediately focused on him, and his fan club began to cheer him on. Sasuke calmly stepped up to the 150-yard line and accepted the weapons from Mizuki. He quickly launched 5 shuriken so close together that it seemed like he threw them simultaneously. To the amazement of the watching students, he got 4 out of 5, missing the last one only because the target shifted at the last moment. Repeating the same thing with the last 5, he got the same score, putting him at the top of the scoreboard so far with a score of 14 points. Mizuki marked down his score, glanced at his board and called the next student, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto nonchalantly made his way forward and received all 10 shuriken from Mizuki. He then turned towards the range, and as the students noticed he was making his way to the 150-yard line, they began to jeer at him, telling him not to bother making a fool of himself. Paying them no heed whatsoever, he stopped at the line, glanced at the targets and launched all 10 shuriken simultaneously. A single sound of metal shredding through cardboard echoed through the clearing, quickly followed by gasps of shock as the students noticed that each of Naruto's shuriken had gone through the red spot on the head of each of the targets. Silence spread through the clearing as the students and Mizuki attempted to understand just what they were seeing. A perfect score, using shuriken launched simultaneously at moving targets 150 yards away. Finally snapping out of his shock, Mizuki smiled and congratulated Naruto while internally seething at this new endangerment to his plan. Yamanaka Ino went next and, choosing not to attempt for extra credit, scored 7 out of 10. Mizuki finished tallying up her score and led the students to the next exam at a stealth test. Arriving at the obstacle course set up for the students, they discovered Ruka waiting for them. Well then, why don't we continue with the tests? As mentioned previously, this test allows you to get more than the allotted 10 points. The objective of this test is to make it through the obstacle course, bypassing all the traps and obstacles set up for you and all without triggering any of the bells strung up in there. You will be graded on your speed and ability to make it through without using any chakra, triggering any bell or getting injured. Each student starts off with 15 points, and if you make it through in less than 3 minutes, without using chakra, ringing any bells or sustaining any injuries, you get to keep your full 15 points. Every 30 seconds after the 3-minute mark that passes, you lose 1 point. If you use chakra, ring a bell or sustain an injury, you lose 1 point. The record for this particular test is actually held by the Yondaime Hokage, who took 4 minutes and 19 seconds, and rang no bell to get a score of 13 points. When Ruka had mentioned the time limit, a lot of students began to think that the course would be relatively short and that they could easily make it through. Their hopes were ruthlessly crushed when he mentioned the Yondaime Hokage's time. If a legend like him could only get 13 points, then obviously the course must be insane. Ruka motioned Shino forward to begin and stepped back. Taking in a barely perceptible breath, Shino ran into the sectioned off obstacle course, and since the students couldn't see what was happening inside, they all fell silent to listen carefully. 1 minute in, They heard a bell ring, followed by another about 45 seconds later. They noticed Truca making a note in his scoreboard, undoubtedly penalizing Shino. The 3-minute mark passed and Shino was still nowhere in sight. Then 5 minutes after he went in, they heard the sound of a trap go off and many surmised that he must have gotten injured. Finally, after one more bell rung, Shino emerged, a full 5 minutes and 27 seconds after beginning. He had one injury from a surprise trap and just barely scraped a score of 7 points. After Mizuki had reset the course, the next student went in. One by one, the other students made a pass at the obstacle course, with most getting times of over 5 minutes and 30 seconds and scores of 6, 7, 8, and in one case, 9 points earned by Kiba. When it got to Sasuke's turn, the students once again gave him their full attention. When he started, they all focused, waiting to hear if he rung any bell or encountered any traps. After 3 minutes, people had begun to think that he might make it through without ringing a bell. Then at the 4-minute mark, they heard the distinct tinkling of a bell, quickly followed by another. Sasuke emerged after 4 minutes and 23 seconds without a single scratch on his body. He earned a score of 11 points. As Sasuke returned to his place in line, he threw a blatantly challenging smirk at Naruto, obviously still miffed by Naruto's performance in the weapon's accuracy test. Naruto obviously caught the look, as did practically everyone else, then nonchalantly dismissed it as he walked past Sasuke to the starting line. This action did not sit well with Sasuke, who had to calm himself before he did anything unbecoming in such a public place. Sasuke's fan club did not hesitate to act in his place though and quickly hurled insults at Naruto, loudest of all coming from Sakura and Ino, blatantly ignoring them, and thus angering them further. Naruto glanced at Truca to give him the go-ahead to begin. At Truca's nod, he was off. The students listened and, despite Naruto's showing at the weapon's range, most of them expected to hear bells going off as well as expletives. After the first minute they had heard nothing. Eyebrows were already being raised and disbelieving glances being shared. After 2 minutes and 58 seconds, Naruto casually strolled out of the exit of the obstacle course, not a single scratch on him, clothes unruffled and bells remaining silent. After Ruka had gotten over his surprise, he marked down Naruto's time in record-shattering score of 15 points. Calmly walking past a bewildered Uchiha Sasuke and gaping Inuzuka Kiba, Naruto returned to the tree he was leaning against before his turn and sat down. On a raised root, Ruka called the last student, Ino, forward and she finished with a score of 8 points. In his office, Sarutobi Hiruzen continued to watch the Ninja Academy exams using his crystal ball. He had been following the progress of Uzumaki Naruto and was pleasantly surprised by his success so far. It gladdened his heart to see Naruto realizing his full potential, even if he mentally made a note to discover just how he had improved so much. He glanced up as he heard his door open and watched as a handful of Jounin, the future Jounin senses of the present graduating class A, entered his office, inviting them over to watch their future students' performances. He refocused on what was happening in the academy. After collating their results, Mizuki and Ruka led them to the taijutsu sparring grounds. Ruka turned to the students, most of whom were now eyeing Naruto with something other than scorn and haughty contempt, and began his instruction. Now, I want you to listen up carefully. The next portion of the exam is a taijutsu spar between you and Mizuki. The time limit for the spar is 2 minutes and your goal is to either defeat him or last the full 2 minutes. Each student will start out with 10 points and here's how the scoring will proceed. If a student wins before the time limit, by either knockout or knocking Mizuki out of the ring, then the amount of time left on the clock will be divided by 20, rounded down to the nearest whole number, and added to their 10 points for their final score. If a student loses before the limit, the same math occurs, but with a deduction from their 10 points for their final score. Once a student lasts past the 2-minute mark, they get their full 10 points whether they win or not. The record for this portion of the exam is a win in a time of 45 seconds, held by the Yondaime Hokage. Now, let us begin with Shino. Shino stepped impassively into the ring with Mizuki, and at Ruka's signal, the spar started. From the get-go it was obvious that Mizuki was not going all out, for how could he? An academy student can ordinarily never hope to match a Chunin. Using his higher-than-average clan taijutsu skills, Shino was finally able to knock Mizuki out of the ring after 1 minute and 37 seconds, for a final score of 11 points. After congratulating him, Ruka called out the next student. And so it went. The students matched up against Mizuki, and only the clan children ever managed to win before the time limit was up, even if Mizuki went easy on them. For the civilians, most were able to last the 2 minutes, while the rest lost before it. Kiba, being the second best student in Taijutsu A on paper A, was able to win after 1 minute and 13 seconds. Eventually, Ruka called out Sasuke's name. Determined to be the best scorer in this portion of the test, Sasuke kicked it into high gear as soon as Ruka started the match. Noticeably moving faster than any of the other students before him, he engaged Mizuki in a ferocious taijutsu encounter. Landing more blows than he received, he ended the match with a brilliantly executed acrobatic maneuver that had his leg propelling Mizuki out of the ring after a hard impact to his chest. Ruka stopped the timer and noted his time of 1 minute and 2 seconds. Confident that no one would be able to beat his time, Sasuke exited the ring with a smug smirk and passed by Naruto, who was already making his way towards the ring before Ruka had even called on him. Back in the Sandame's office, some of the Jounin expressed approval at the Uchiha heir's taijutsu prowess, commenting that he obviously must be the genius of his generation. Hatake Kakashi, one of the Jounin present, silently observed one of his future students with his one eye, before returning to his orange-covered book. Noticing the lack of commentary from his comrade, Sarutobi Asuma glanced over only to huff in exasperation at Kakashi's terrible habit. Not that he was one to talk, however. When the Jounin noticed that Naruto was next, they paid close attention. That attention only sharpened further when Kakashi put away his book and focused on the crystal ball as well. Giving off an amused chuckle, the Sandame returned to gazing at the scene that was unfolding in the academy. Waiting for Ruka to finish recording Sasuke's time, Naruto calmly observed Mizuki standing opposite him, taking particular notice of the well-hidden malice in his eyes. Knowing that Mizuki would probably not hold back in the first few moments of their spar, he prepared himself to crush the traitor swiftly and ruthlessly. The other students, Sasuke in particular, quickly focused on the spar that was about to begin, hoping to see if Naruto's previously hidden skills included taijutsu as well. Mizuki just wanted to kill two birds with one stone and diminish Naruto's chances of graduating while getting to beat him down. The moment Ruka gave the signal, Mizuki was off, blurring across the arena. Faster than any of the other Jonin could ever hope to follow, he appeared in front of Naruto, his right fist already rocketing towards the boy's head. So confident was he in getting in the first strike that he overcommitted to the blow, and so, when his hand passed through the space where Naruto's face used to be, he found that he had overextended himself. Before his brain could put together what the lack of impact meant, his body was already folding over the right knee that Naruto had plowed into his stomach. Blood left his mouth as Ruka and the students watching gasped in shock when they noticed the foot-sized crater created where Naruto had pushed of the ground. Naruto's leg came back down just as physics caught up to Mizuki, whose body had begun to leave the floor. It was not to be, however. Naruto's right hand was suddenly gripping his hair as he drove his head back down to meet the left knee that he had just raised. The spectators winced when a crack resounded through the clearing, quickly followed by blood spraying out of Mizuki's nose and mouth as he slipped into blissful unconsciousness. Numb fingers clicked the button on the timer and Ruka slowly gazed at the clock's face. 3 seconds. A low whistle left the mouth of one of the Jounin gathered around the Hokage's crystal ball, followed by an amazed, yet quite accurate, observation. Now, that was a smackdown. The Hokage chuckled and puffed out a cloud of tobacco smoke as he thought to himself, Kushina, he really is your son. The Hokage had obviously noticed that Mizuki had started off too strong for just a taijutsu spar and made a mental note to keep an eye on him. Kakashi, who had also noticed that Mizuki's intentions were less than pure, watched with vindictive pleasure as the idiot slumped to the ground in a bleeding and broken mess. Serves him right for pulling a stunt like that. The students had begun to whisper as soon as Naruto had been declared the winner by knockout. Many of them were wondering just when the supposed deadlust had gotten so strong and why he had kept on avoiding assessment tests during the academy school year. Sasuke, meanwhile, was mentally reconsidering everything he thought he knew about Uzumaki Naruto and making plans to corner him for questioning later. Back on the sparring field, Ruka had propped Mizuki against a tree and used what little battlefield healing jutsu he knew. Since his partner was out for the count, he faced off against Ino himself, winning the spar after 1 minute and 50 seconds. After the students had gotten over their shock at seeing the deadlust demolish their teacher, Ruka herded them back into the classroom for the final portion of the exam, being that it was a fairly straightforward process. His instructions were short: you hear your name, enter the next room and do what we tell you, and when you're done, move on to the room across from you and wait for the rest to finish. He started with Shino as always, and continued down the list. Mizuki, who had recovered, joined him halfway through. Sasuke walked in when it was his turn and then Naruto's name was called. As Naruto made his way towards the connecting door, his acute hearing easily picked up what was being said in the room that contained those who had already finished their exams. Smirking to himself at successfully stirring up the hive, he entered the connecting room to see the two instructors seated at a table. He walked to stand in front of them, absently noting that the hatred in Mizuki's eyes was more visible, probably due to his humiliating injuries. Smiling proudly at him, Ruka spoke, "Well, Naruto, you've gotten to the last portion of the exams. This ninjutsu test is fairly straightforward. You will be tested on the use of the basic 3 jutsu of the Kawarimi, Henge and Bunshin no Jutsu. We will begin with the Kawarimi. Now, sometime in the next 15 seconds and with no prior warning, Mizuki will launch a blunted kunai at you, which you must obviously avoid by switching out with something else. Extra points will be given for demonstrated mastery of the jutsu. The 15 seconds starts now." Naruto had kept his cool gaze on Mizuki throughout the speech given by Ruka and thus easily made out the lust for vengeance that brightened his eyes when Ruka mentioned the surprise blunted kunai. Fully aware that Mizuki would attempt to get him back for his previous humiliation, he subtly went on alert for any tricks, while appearing calm, unconcerned and wide open. 9 seconds after the official start of the testing, Mizuki launched a kunai with no prior warning at Naruto, whose eyes easily tracked it even if it was traveling far faster than a Genin could handle. The kunai traveled the gap in an instant and, to the horror of Ruka and barely hidden glee of Mizuki, it plunged into Naruto's chest. Ruka watched a devastated as Naruto's eyes widened in pain and his body began to fall backwards. He was on his feet in an instant, about to rush towards Naruto, to give whatever futile aid he could when Naruto's body burst into smoke and revealed a chair with the kunai sticking halfway out of it. It took a moment for Ruka to understand what he was seeing and he slumped in relief. A chuckle behind him had him turning to see Naruto standing there with an amused air about him. In the Hokage's office, the present Jounin allowed their muscle to relax once they realized that Naruto had successfully performed the replacement technique. Most noted with interest that the Kawarimi had been pulled off without any hand seals and with a kind of mastery only found in high-level Chunin ninja and above. After he had calmed his heart rate, Ruka turned to berate Mizuki for using what was obviously a real kunai. Mizuki acted sheepish and was able to somewhat fool Ruka into believing that it was a simple oversight on his part. He even apologized to Naruto, who wasn't fooled for an instant. Mizuki was aware that at this point, Naruto had already passed his graduation exam. So, he privately began to revise his plan for stealing the forbidden scroll of sealing. After things had calmed down, and Ruka had marked Naruto extra for performing a seamless kawarimi with no hand seals and with enough mastery to leave a decoy after image. He resumed with the tests. Good job on the kawarimi, Naruto. Now, you simply have to hinge into another person, and then create at least 3 clones. With only a nod, Naruto's form simply shimmered, and in his place was the Sandaime Hokage in full Hokage robes and his pipe in hand. As the figure before them looked up, Ruka and Mizuki subconsciously straightened when they met that ancient and penetrating gaze. Calmly, the figure of the Sandaime breathed out a small stream of fire and lit his pipe. Taking a few puffs, he exhaled some tobacco which Ruka could smell and spoke in the mellow and soothing tones of the professor. How are you, Ruka-kun? For an instant, Ruka was about to reply as he had always done when the Sandaime asked after him, but then he reminded himself that this was Naruto under an eerily realistic hinge and said, "Very good, Naruto, that's another sealless, smokeless and obviously mastered jutsu. At this point in time, you already have passing marks, but if you want to continue, you can attempt to create at least 3 bunshins." Once again, with neither smoke nor sound, the room was suddenly containing 10 Narutos placed at regular intervals in a circle around the room. Looking around, neither Ruka nor Mizuki were able to determine which one was the real Naruto. Chuckling as he wrote in his clipboard, Ruka awarded Naruto full marks with extra credit for mastery of the 3 Academy Jutsu. He then said, "Okay, Naruto, you can disperse them now." 9 Narutos, including the one standing where the original had been, faded out of existence without a trace. Turning in surprise, the instructors found the original standing at the back of the room, obviously amused at their surprise. Shaking his head, Ruka said, "You never cease to amaze me, Naruto." Then beaming with pride at him, Ruka tossed him a Hitai 8 and told him, "You pass, Naruto, with distinction. Congratulations." Smiling at him, Naruto caught the Hitai 8 and bowed to the 2 teachers. He made his way out of the room into the room across him, where the students who had finished were waiting. When he walked in with his Hitai 8 displayed on his forehead, none of the students were surprised anymore. Naruto had apparently already desensitized them. During the earlier tests, Naruto sat at the back as he often did, and about 10 minutes later, Ino entered with her own headband, followed by Ruka and Mizuki. Ruka beamed at the students and began his closing statements. "Well, it's all done now. Though some of you might not have done as well as you expected, I am still proud of the progress you have all made. Those of you who couldn't make the passing grade can retry next year. I have full faith that you will be ready by then. For those of you who received your Hitai 8, you have my congratulations. Make sure to be here tomorrow morning for team assignments." And without further ado, the announcement I know most of you have been waiting for: the Rookie of the Year. This year, the Rookie of the Year position is awarded to Akaya Sasuke for a consistently outstanding performance throughout his attendance. Most of the students applauded, having already expected as much, with members of the Sasuke fan club screeching loudly. After calming them down, Ruka continued, "There is still one more thing to take care of, however. Akaya-san earned the title of Rookie of the Year because all 6 years of schooling were taken into account. Taking only the graduation exam into consideration, however, the results are quite different. I will now list the top 3 students with scores in each of the exam sections. In Yuzuka Kiba, with scores of 6.7, 11, 9, 12 and 11, earned a total of 49.7 to come in 3rd place. Kiba immediately cheered at doing so well in the exams, ignoring his terrible score in the written portion of the exam. Some of the people around him congratulated him, while others pointed out that his accumulated score must be terrible to be able to offset his high exam score. At the observation, he flushed and grumbled while others laughed. The students eventually turned back to Ruka, who continued, "Akaya Sasuke, with scores of 8.1, 14, 11, 12 and 13, earned a total of 58.1 to come in 2nd place. Most of the girls in class cheered at Sasuke's high score, before quieting down as they realized that someone had obviously scored higher than him. Many of the students reached the proper conclusion about the identity of the first place winner at the same time and turned to gape in shock at the person they had derided as the dead last for the past 6 years. Speaking into the bewildered silence, Ruka announced Naruto's score. Uzumaki Naruto, with record-shattering scores of 10, 20, 15, 15 and 15, earned the highest possible score of 75 points to come in first place. Naruto is now the current holder for highest score in every portion of the graduation exams. Congratulations Naruto, and to the rest of you as well. I will see you tomorrow. And with the rest of the class gaping at the disinterested Naruto, Ruka and Mizuki departed from the classroom. Naruto stood up and meandered outside as well, while the rest of the students looked on in stunned silence. The sound of the door closing behind him roused them from their stupor, and Naruto smirked as he heard a cry of outrage and shock that originated from Kiba. Chuckling to himself, he vanished from the hallway, disappearing as though he were never there. In the Hokage's office, the jounin who had been watching the performance of their students missed Naruto's disappearing act because, by then the Hokage had ended the jutsu that allowed them to view the classroom. Turning to his jounin, Sarutobi prepared to begin the meeting he had originally called them for. He mused to himself that things were obviously about to become very interesting. Naruto watched the sun rise from the top of the Yondame's head. Taking in such clean air and listening to the birds sing in the morning always invoked feelings of nostalgia in him. Contrary to what they say, the world for him had ended, and began, not on a stormy night, but on such a peaceful morning. Now, as he gazed over the slowly awakening village, his mind recalled a time far in the past, hopefully never in the future, when Konoha was just a blackened spot on the map, and where the resurrected Uchiha Madara had finally captured him. Naruto fought and struggled against the chakra bonds that held him in place. He screamed and raged as Madara finished extracting the Hokage and dropped the rapidly cooling body of his friend, mentor and brother in arms. He turned his gaze away from the corpse, and the approaching Madara, to watch the remnants of the Shinobi allied forces standing helplessly outside the barrier that Madara had set up, when they had first arrived, intending to rescue Killer Bee and Naruto. They had thrown everything they had at the barrier, only to watch in horror as the chakra fueling their rescue attempts was absorbed by the barrier, strengthening it further. Madara had just scoffed disdainfully and turned to begin the extraction. Now he stood before Naruto and started weaving the hand seals that would begin the tug-of-war between Naruto and the Jidomazo, where defeat was certain death. Smiling in anticipation of possessing the Kyuubi and finally remaking the Jubai, Madara completed the hand signs and began the procedure. The moment the questing hand of purple chakra touched Naruto, his body, his world, his very reality became pain. The scream that was wrenched from his throat was so soul-searing that it sapped the strength from Tsunade's bones, leaving her to slump in sorrow and anguish as she watched the last thing that still mattered to her get his soul shredded to sate a madman's thirst for power. Through the haze of pain, Naruto became aware of the chakra bindings failing under the force of the chakra being exerted. With his reconnection to his chakra, the very thing that was being ripped out of him, his pain increased tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold even. He felt his very soul being pulled apart as the Jidomazo attempted to remove the Kyuubi, only to discover that the two beings were too tightly bound. One would go nowhere without the other. When the Yondaime had sealed the Kyuubi in Naruto, he had invoked the power of a being outside mortal comprehension. The act of sealing a half of the Kyuubi inside the belly of the Shinigami killed two birds with one stone. He was able to lock away a portion of the Kyuubi's power forever, but he was also able to bring the death god forth to attempt what no man had ever attempted before, to utilize a portion of a god's essence to shackle an immortal creature to a mortal child soul. Indeed, people lauded the genius of the Yondaime while only being aware of less than half of what he had accomplished that night. Even when Jiraiya and the Sandaime had examined the seal on Naruto, they were unable to see beyond the admittedly complex surface design of the seal. Thus, they missed the part of the seal that held a portion of the Shinigami's power, which held the main containment seal together and bound the Kyuubi's soul more tightly to Naruto's own. So, when Madara attempted to extract the Kyuubi from Naruto, he was attempting to separate two souls that had been bound as one by the power of a being that existed in the space between spaces, in the moments between seconds. Madara, for all his vaunted power and legendary status, was as a child playing with forces beyond his limited human understanding. The chakra of a Jitomazo had latched onto the Kyuubi and begun to pull. Naruto's soul obviously resisted the extraction, much like one would resist another's attempt to pull off one's arm. Somehow, Naruto was able to finally fight through the world-devouring pain he was in and pull back against the force behind the extraction process. The knowledge that his life was not the only thing at stake gave him an inner strength that was beyond any he had ever possessed. Madara felt the resistance and panicked. The surrounding shinobi dared to hope as they watched Madara flare his chakra as though he were fighting against a steady force. And indeed, that was what he was doing. Noticing that the progress of the extraction process had slowed to a crawl, he joined his chakra to the statue hoping to boost it. Naruto gritted his teeth as he felt the strength behind the opposite pull increase tremendously. Because he had been fighting for so long, he was at less than half strength. Knowing that very soon his current strength would fail against the combined might of Madara and the other 8 Biju powering the Jitomazo, he attempted something that he had only theorized about all those years ago when he had learned to utilize natural energy. The main principle behind successfully molding natural energy was keeping a steady balance of natural, physical and spiritual energy in the core of the individual. This requirement of constant balance is what limited the amount of sage chakra that could be molded at any given time, and the amount of physical and spiritual energy the individual possessed determined how much natural energy they could mold to keep the balance. For someone with obscene amounts of chakra, like Naruto, the amount of sage chakra he could mold at a time could boggle the mind. However, after a few years of using shadow clones to mold sage chakra and then transfer said chakra to him when he ran out, he set out to find a better method. His determination led to him learning how to mold sage chakra while in motion. It was, however, not the solution he had originally envisioned. Natural energy was the energy of the earth, the chakra of life itself, and as such, Naruto believed that it was as close to infinite as one could ever get. This notion arose from the fact that it was practically impossible to use up that much chakra before more was regenerated. With that in mind, he came up with a theory: if he could absorb enough natural energy to create a stable balance and then begin to absorb, in a steady amount, more natural energy while simultaneously utilizing the same amounts of natural energy from his core, he could take advantage of the infinite nature of natural energy. Essentially, he would be using up the natural energy in his core just as fast as he would be replenishing it, while keeping the mixture of 3 energies in perfect balance. He believed that natural energy, being neutral, could be controlled to do things normal chakra couldn't, such as resisting the attempted theft of one's soul. He had never tested his theory, but here, with his soul being torn asunder, it was as good a time as any. Fighting through the haze of pain he was in, Naruto began to draw on the natural energy around him, a energy that had always been in a relatively surplus amount in Fire Country. Owing to the numerous trees and animals littering the land, Madara roared in anger as he felt the pull on the Kyuubi reverse direction. Turning his attention to Naruto, he found a calm young man with a serene look on his face, where before there had been a body thrashing in the grasp of unfathomable pain. He was just about to force out even more of his chakra when he glanced up in momentary surprise, causing his concentration to flicker for an instant before he recovered his focus. Tsunade had been watching from her position slumped on the floor, watching as her combination son and little brother in all but blood got his very soul torn apart. She stirred from the tempest of anguish and loss that had ensnared her when she noticed the change in the mood around her. A glance revealed what the matter was as she noticed the peace and calm on Naruto's face. When the pulling motion of the chakra hand originating from the Jitomazo slowed to a stop, she rose to her feet. When the pull actually began to reverse, she took a step forward, a hope and wonder beginning to shine on her face. When she noticed Madara about to act in retaliation for whatever Naruto was doing, she made up her mind. Knowing that she was about to gamble, and quite probably lose, she sprang forward with her clenched fist blazing with chakra. With the roar of an enraged mother bear, she punched the barrier, producing a deep sound much like striking a gong. As the barrier's chakra absorption ability kicked in and attempted to absorb the chakra in her punch, she released the chakra in one burst just as she normally did for her super punches. When the shinobi forces had first attempted to break the barrier, she noticed that the absorption of chakra happened at a gradual pace. What she had done was try to force feed it more than it could handle in such a short time. The barrier flickered a broken bar I circumflex 3/4 middle. Madara glanced up in surprise. Broken bar. The chakra feedback from her stunt blasted Tsunade away. With fatal wounds, a broken bar. Madara's concentration faltered for a heartbeat. A broken bar. It was Inau. A broken bar. Naruto gave an almighty pull. A broken bar. The Jitomazo lost. A broken bar. Nothing was ever the same. The moment Naruto felt Madara hesitate, he pulled with everything he had, and like an elastic band, the portion of his soul in the grasp of the Jitomazo snapped back inside his body. But his soul was not the only thing that came back. He had neglected the fact that the Jitomazo had a firm hold on his soul, so when he dragged the Kyuubi back in, the chakra of the Jitomazo and the 8-by-Ju with it came along for the ride. Naruto had just unknowingly done what Madara had intended to do to himself. Everyone watched in dawning horror as the last of the Jitomazo's chakra disappeared into Naruto. All was still as though the entire world had just taken in a deep breath. Then the stillness was shattered as Naruto threw his head back and howled. As the chakra of the 9-by-Ju and the Jitomazo merged inside his core, the balance of natural energy and body chakra was thrown out of whack, and so, Naruto subconsciously compensated and began to take in more natural energy. He absorbed increasingly larger amounts of natural energy until he had enough to match the raging chakra in his core. The problem with this was that when the chakra in his core combined, it resulted in chakra equivalent to a primordial being. The Jobai, often called the 10-tailed god, the Jobai was credited with creating the world and all life in it. So, when Naruto tried to balance out that chakra with natural energy, he had to absorb everything the world could give, essentially absorbing the equivalent of 2 godly beings. It was too much power for a single human soul to contain, and as Naruto's very existence threatened to burn out, the Shinigami got involved. The chakra present inside Naruto was trying to negate his existence, trying to cast his very soul into oblivion. Yet, that very soul had been touched by the essence of death, a being for whom oblivion does not exist. Contradictions could not be allowed in reality, and so Naruto had to be removed from existence without his existence being compromised. Only one solution presented itself, and thus Naruto became more than human. More than merely mortal, he became the eternal sage. The actual process of transcending his mortal limits happened both in an instant and for an eternity. Since the laws of the reality Naruto existed and demanded that a mortal soul be unable to exist with so much power contained in it, the essence of the Shinigami dragged Naruto somewhere where such laws held no sway, into the space between spaces, and the moment between seconds, into the place where the death god ruled. There, Naruto experienced eternity as the powers he had absorbed integrated themselves inside him, bonding to his very essence. Under the onslaught of so much raw power, all that he was, all that he had ever been was erased. Uzumaki Naruto died, for the eternal sage to live. After the sage had acclimated to the influx of power and the shared experiences contained in the essences of the Baiju, he departed from the place of his rebirth, and as though taking a step, he was suddenly standing at the spot where he had previously laid. All this had happened in the time it took to blink. In an instant everything had changed. Madara took a few moments to take in what he was seeing. Just moments ago, the Kibaji and Chuuriki had absorbed the newly made Jobai as Jobai and was in the process of burning out, quite literally. Now, the meddlesome child was standing there looking at him as though he were a particularly fascinating insect. He was Uchiha Madara, and he would not be trifled with. Madara locked hate-filled eyes with the otherworldly blue gaze of his adversary and spat out, "Amaterasu." The sage blinked at the roaring black flames bearing down on him, and they simply ceased to be. Madara refused to allow himself to stop to consider what just happened. He clapped his hands and a forest burst from the ground, reaching forward to destroy his opponent. The sage tilted his head at the incoming trees and they turned to dust, dispersed on the wind. Enraged beyond any measure, Madara summoned Susanoo and wove 3 hand seals, then screamed out, "Tengai Shinsei!" Knowing what the jutsu did, the remnants of the Shinobi allied forces glanced at the skies in time to see 3 meteorites breach the atmosphere, one after another. Many began to panic as the first meteorite rapidly descended to the spot where they stood. The sage stood still as the meteorite got closer and closer, and when it was seconds away from impact, he merely raised his hand and extended his finger. Jaws dropped as the meteorite stopped abruptly, with the other 2 stacking on top of the first. With a sigh, the sage flicked his finger and with a sonic boom, the meteorites exited the planet's atmosphere. Suddenly, the sage was standing in front of Madara, but before he could react he found his throat in an unyielding grip. Madara tried and failed to access his chakra and escape. He struggled in the grip of the being in front of him, much like Naruto had struggled in his chakra bonds earlier on. Madara paused in his struggles as he felt a stirring in the depths of his body. His eyes widened as the source of the feeling became clear. Once more, the remnants of the Shinobi Alliance forces watched in stunned shock as Madara began to scream, much like Naruto had been screaming when the Jitomazo attempted to extract his soul. Quickly connecting the dots, they watched as Madara eventually stilled and his resurrected body crumbled to dust without his soul to inhabit it. The sage turned and many avoided his gaze, unable to meet the eyes of the newly born primordial being before him. His eyes finally settled on the barely breathing body of Senjutsu Tsunade and in a blink, he was kneeling next to her. Something faint within him told him that the human lying before him was important to him, and he decided to heed it and simply touched her cheek. Before the disbelieving eyes of everyone present, Tsunade's wounds healed up and even her chakra levels were restored. Looking at the man beside her in relief and deep fondness, she asked, "Naruto? Sir Broken Bar, is that you, Naruto? Are you really Naruto?" The sage wondered if Naruto was his name. Yes, he thought to himself, Naruto Broken Bar Uzumaki Naruto Broken Bar no, Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto Broken Bar yes, that was it, he was Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto. And with that, the sage remembered. Smiling softly at her he replied, "Hey, you shouldn't be pulling such dangerous stunts at your age, Bachan." Laughing, with tears flowing freely from her eyes, she grabbed him in a hug and just like that, it finally dawned on everyone watching that the 8-year-long war had just ended. Cheers erupted everywhere as people grabbed their comrades in hugs, crying tears of joy and relief tinged with sadness. It took years, but the world eventually recovered, not completely, but enough. Throughout that time the sage lived on, not aging, until time had run its course and turned everything he knew into dust. After finally learning how to navigate the paths between realities, the eternal sage moved on, replacing any of his counterparts who had been lost to the flow of time for one reason or the other, with time becoming his only companion. Naruto was startled out of his memories by the dispersal of one of his clones. Shaking his head to get rid of lingering memories, he stood up, dusted his shorts and gazed once more at the peaceful village laid out before him. Smiling to himself, he vanished in the direction of the academy for his team assignments. Let the games begin. Thank you for watching.